Hi everybody, my name is Bridget and I am here and I'm just going to give you a little bit of information about the bacteria in space. I chose this particular topic because I've always been fascinated with our solar system, and it hasn't been a few weeks ago I seen a news topic come up across the TV about life on Mars and some of the bacteria and the experiments, so I decided to dig deeper and give you some information on this topic. I hope you guys enjoy it. So, can bacteria actually survive in space? Interestingly, yes, they absolutely can. Even though cosmic radiation and the lack of oxygen is what makes up space, there is no competition to the bacteria, even though very few died along the experiment, which apparently the scientists actually expected. The bacteria actually thrive in these conditions. They love the horrendous, nasty conditions that us humans cannot survive in. And so if you were a germaphobe or a mysophobiac, I would not recommend pursuing a career in being an astronaut. A scientist by the name of Cheryl Nickerson wondered why in the world did these bacteria survive in these conditions. So she came up with a theory about low levels of fluid shearing force. And basically what fluid shearing force is kind of like running water. When we wash our hands, the force of the water helps wash some of the germs and bacteria off our hands. Space has a very low level of fluid shearing force, as our body does in some areas, including the respiratory tract, the urogenital tract, and the intestinal tract, which are very common breeding grounds for infections and bacteria. For example, the respiratory tract has the URI, the upper respiratory infection. The urogenital has the UTI, urinary tract infection, and the intestinal, which I see a lot in the hospital setting, is C. diff. Because these have low levels of fluid shearing force, just as space does, they are very high breeding grounds because nothing really washes away the germs and bacteria, so they just keep breeding because there's nothing there to kill them. So I just wanted to show you guys a few experiments that have been done recently and in the past. This does not conclude all of them, they're just 3 that I randomly picked out. The first one is the International Space Station, which you can see I included a picture here on the right. And when the International Space Station returned from orbit, they took a culture and they found that the largest quantity of the bacteria was actually actinobacteria. And that is a bacteria that is associated with our skin, the human skin. And it just really shocked them because they were expecting it something to be like E. coli or salmonella or just something completely different. So they have not figured out why that is, but I just thought it was pretty cool. The second is the Russian Mir space station, and it actually had issues in orbit with not being able to see out the windows clearly because the bacteria had formed such a thick film over the windows, it was hard for them to see out. And when they returned, they actually noticed that the windows had been corroded by this nasty bacteria, as well as the electronical systems had started rusting, and they also contained a lot of bacteria. This was also really shocking to them because the windows are made out of coarse glass and they were in a titanium frame, so they're really sturdy. And before the space shuttles or anything got sent up to space, they were spraying it with a toxic gas that was supposed to kill all bacteria. So they still are puzzled about this. And the third is the Space Shuttle Atlantis. And the first experiment was they took and they placed Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and they placed it in artificial urine and sent it up to space to grow for 3 days. And when it came back, they realized that it had a brand new structure they had never seen before, and they decided to name it Column and Canopy. They also seen that the biofilms were a lot thicker and a lot larger in size than their control group. And the second experiment they did was by the same person I mentioned before, Cheryl Nickerson. And this experiment was used with salmonella in mice. They sent salmonella and grew some up in space, and when they returned from orbit, they decided to inject these mice with the salmonella grew in space, and then they had a control group that was salmonella that was grown on Earth. And they actually reduced the dose from the salmonella that was grown in space. So the mice that received that dose got a lot less than the control group. And they actually learned from this experiment that the salmonella grown in space was a lot more potent because their salmonella injected mice from space died 2 days sooner than the others, and that was with a lower dose. So basically, the scientists just concluded that the space is a breeding ground for bacteria, and it makes it a lot more dangerous. And now they're a little bit more concerned because this bacteria is becoming, harder on the equipment and a lot more, scary for the astronauts. And they're worried about their health and obviously their equipment because they put so much money into this. So they have looked at new theories and they're still working on this actual subject. But another theory they have came up with is maybe the bacteria are hiding in the small cracks and crevices of these space shuttles and the toxic gas is not reaching to those small spaces. And so they are actually just still trying to figure that out. But space is a sterile environment. So if bacteria can survive that toxic gas when they get up to space, they can grow like crazy. And so that is just what scientists are still trying to figure out. I personally think that this is such a cool topic, and I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. And I am so happy to see what they decide to do and what they find out in the future. Thank you guys.